Hey everybody, it's Dave here at Pulp Alley, and today I just wanted to talk a little bit about the Vice Alley campaign. We're going to talk a little bit about how our campaign has been going. We've been playing it every Sunday morning for like the last 7 weeks or so. But I also want to just talk about, just in general, how the Vice Alley campaign is a little bit different from some of our other campaigns, and then also talk about how this Vice Alley, how this campaign is played. So kind of go over some of the rules for it that make it different. Of course, this is all part of the Pulp Alley adventure game, the tabletop game. Awesome little game. Can't recommend it enough. Anyway, if you're new to our little channel, we talk about a lot of terrain. We talk about a lot of gaming stuff. I'd appreciate it if you get subscribed to our little channel. Also, be sure and hit that like button and the bell so you get a notification when we upload a new video. So, Vice Alley is one of our first edition campaigns, and to be honest, we intend to update all of these books to second edition, improve them, add new scenarios, fix little things that I want to fix, and stuff like that. So eventually, within the next 5 years or so, hopefully we can get these books updated to second edition. But for now, nothing wrong with digging out the old first edition copy and playing it. After all, Pulp Alley was intended to be mostly backwards compatible with first edition stuff. So the Vice Alley campaign is really inspired by some of those old pulps and serials like The Spider, like The Shadow. And back in the 1930s, one of the big villains were these shadowy figures that tried to take over cities or even countries and things like that. So that's kind of what we're dealing with here. In the story of King City is this big sprawling metropolis. Vice Alley is actually a very small little section of it. But there's a personality called the Spectre that is currently ruling over King City from his shadowy underworld figure. And there's a lot of gangsters and stuff that want to overthrow him and kick him out because he's kind of rubbing them the wrong way. And also there have been a fresh crop of vigilantes pop up to try and thwart the Spectre as well because, he's really a bad dude. Now, in truth, we don't really know who the Spectre is, and that's part of the campaign, and I'm not going to spoil it for you at this point. So it could even be a man or a woman. We say he in general, but Spectre could be just about anything you want to imagine him to be. All right, so when you're playing this, you start off either as a syndicate league or as a vigilante league. So you have to kind of put yourself into that sort of role. Either you're already part of the Spectre's organization and you're trying to overthrow him because you don't like him, or you're a vigilante trying to overthrow him because you don't like him. So, but it still gives you those two factions to kind of go up in as you gain experience. So the book has, let's see if this camera is working. Yep, okay. The book has the two factions. We have the Syndicate faction, and it gives you a brief overview of just some random background stories if you wanted to kind of describe why your character or why your league is, turning against the Spectre, or how you ended up being part of the Syndicate. And then the next part here is it talks about your influence as you go up in rank. So as you play scenarios, In the Vice Alley campaign, you gain influence based on the number of victory points that you achieve in each scenario that you play. Influence is just that. It increases your influence within the city, within your faction, and so on. And it gives you a lot of cool stuff. It also can have a negative effect, which I'm going to get into a little bit later as I kind of explain this. So there's a little description of the uh, places of interest in Vice Alley or in King City in general, and then also some people of interest. And it's certainly possible that one of the people on this list could in fact be the Spectre. So some of the just random personalities that you can kind of introduce into your campaign. There's the syndicate page again, and then we have the vigilantes. So here again is a little bit of background information if you want to pick one of these or just make up your own. And then of course there is the ranking, just like for the syndicate. You have a little bit of a ranking table here, and as you increase influence, at 0 influence as you start the campaign, you are unknown. And then as you get up to 5 influence, you become a menace to society. Newspapers are beginning to report about you, possibly on radio shows and things like that. As you reach 10 influence, perhaps you're called a guardian of the city. So now, and each one of these has different bonuses that you're going to get. For example, when you become a guardian, you gain a random location. We're going to talk about locations a little bit more. You also gain the investigation scenario. So you can choose to play the investigation scenario. You gain a secret base and so on. So at each level, as you go up, champion and then hero of the city. So when you get to champion, that's the first time that you get access to the Queen's Gambit scenario. So as you progress through the campaign, you gain influence. That influence helps you gain locations and friends and information. That also gives you the secret base. That also gains access to new scenarios that you can use that you weren't able to play before. The whole goal for the campaign is to defeat the Spectre. And the way that's done in this campaign is to play the scenario called Queen's Gambit and to win it. So in the Queen's Gambit scenario, you actually face the Spectre himself, and you have to defeat him in that scenario. If you could defeat him by playing the Queen's Gambit scenario, then that ends the campaign and yada yada. We get into the wrap up and all of that sort of stuff. So very, very cool, very pulp, very serials. If you watch a bunch of those old serials like that, and there was tons of them like the G-Men and all of that sort of stuff, and that kind of fits into this sort of setting. All right, so the locations that you can come up with represent people or supporters within the city that you can go to and talk to and try and get help from, possibly that give you different forms of assistance. So here are some of the locations that you can earn or that you can take control of: office, a shop, a newsstand, a flop house, pool hall, social club, bar, restaurant. And then there are some special, like a hobo camp and a police station and a racetrack, a warehouse, a brothel, nightclub, and so on and so on. So lots of cool locations. And the way this works is that each one of these can give you a bonus, but to get that bonus in between the scenarios, you've got to send somebody to it. So you could say, well, if I had a dock here, this dock location, I look at this and I say, well, I can get a level 1 backup character. Well, that's pretty cool, but I've got to be a cunning with 1 success. And you could look at your character cards and you could say, well, who do I have that could pass a cunning check? You could say, well, old Pops here can pass a cunning check. So regardless of how many different locations you have, you are limited by the number of characters that you have in your league. So let's take a look at Red Queen's league real quickly just to see how many locations she is up to. Um, Currently, she has a newsstand, a hotel, an office, a social club, a flop house, and a brothel. So that is 6 different locations. Well, she only has 4 characters. So that's kind of a self-balancing sort of thing that regardless of even if you get a bunch of different locations, you're not going to probably be able to visit them all. Even if you do visit them all, you're not going to be able to send, your best character to all of them because each character can only visit one location per scenario. So Pops could only go to one location. He can't visit multiple locations. That's, just part of the rules for it. So although they could pull in these cool little bonuses and advantages, doesn't really break the campaign by somebody getting a few more locations because it stays very, very tight and balanced. The other thing that kind of keeps it balanced is the idea that the character with the lower influence frequently gets to pick the scenarios, and that's probably the biggest balancing part of this campaign. And what that represents is the idea that as a league gains influence and becomes more popular, gains more control within the city, is being reported on by the newspapers and the radio programs and things like that. Not only do they gain more help from the city, but the specter also becomes more aware of them. So he's watching their actions, he knows what they're up to, and it's harder for someone who has reached some of that higher pinnacle to move around secretly and to avoid the specter's notice. So it's actually harder for the characters that have more influence to get a chance to pick the scenario that they want, which is ultimately to pick the Queen's Gambit scenario. So just real quickly, I'll take a look at the scenario table. If you roll a 1 or a 2, and the player that rolls on this table is whoever has the lower influence. So if you roll a 1 or a 2, that means the opponent, whoever is the player that has the higher influence, will actually get to pick the scenario that they want. If you roll an 8 through 12, then you just basically get to pick whatever you want. And then if you roll the other options, then you have a few different things to pick from there. And of course, Vice Alley does have its own events table as well. It has a bunch of its own scenarios in there, like Social Affair. That's a lot of fun. Crime Wave, on and on. It has a bunch of cool scenarios. But then it also relies on the basic scenarios out of the core rulebook. Those scenarios are intended to always be things like Smash and Grab and Lost Keys, right? Those scenarios are always intended to be reskinned and used over and over again. They have just infinite replayability. Wonderful scenarios to use. All right, if you have any questions about the Vice Alley campaign, be sure and ask. Make sure you take an opportunity right now to get subscribed to our little channel. Hit the like button and hit the bell, and we will see you next time. Bye, everybody.